preached these are ones that I've just considered to be my favorites. I got to tell you, I have a suspicion this is going to become the next one of my favorites. Because God used my preparation time for this sermon to answer a question that I've been asking for the last 40 years. I'll tell you a little more about that in a minute. I have literally been struggling with a question for 40 years. And I think I got a little insight this week. And I've read over this passage numerous times, and God finally answered that question. I was looking in the wrong domain. Those of you with an education background will understand what I mean very quickly. The rest of you, I'll explain it in a few minutes when we get down to that. But I'm excited about this sermon. And so I want to come to Matthew 9. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story. I mentioned my mom had surgery Monday, and I went up, and because of some issues, my sister wasn't able to be there at the hospital. She needed to be at home. And so when the doctor came out to talk to the family, he came out and talked to me. Now, my brother-in-law is a surgeon. My sister is a nurse. I'm not that kind of doctor. But I have a pretty good knowledge of anatomy, and I can kind of speak medical, and I actually do speak Greek, so I understand a lot of it. But the doctor didn't know any of that. He just knew that I was a lay person, and so he decided to try to explain to me on the lowest possible terms what had happened. And it got really frustrating to me. Because I couldn't understand what he was trying to say. He was trying to dumb it down so much that I was trying to have to translate it back up, and it wasn't working very well. So finally I said, look, just say it in medical, and I'll translate as much as I can. I'll ask you if I don't understand it. He was kind of shocked by that. He had kind of an awakening experience. And all of a sudden, he starts talking to me like I actually knew what I was talking about. And there are a couple of words that I missed, and that's okay. Most of them were proper names of different medications, but I understood them. I understood most of what he was saying, and I got it. I got a whole lot more when he was speaking to me straight than when he was dumbing it down. That's kind of been my approach to life. If I don't understand, I'm going to ask the question. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Matthew 9, beginning in verse 31. If you got it, hold it up, say, I got it.
Got it.
Mark 9, I'm sorry. Mark 9. Is everybody there? My bad, I'm sorry. It's all right, I told Thomas earlier, John. So, anyway, we're in chapter 9 of one of the Gospels. Mark, how about Mark? Mark's good. Okay, everybody with me in Mark 9, right? For he was teaching his disciples we're going to begin reading in verse 31. I'm sorry, I guess that would help you. For he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. But they did not understand the statement, and they were afraid to ask him. I'm excited about this passage. Because it basically is Jesus telling us the gospel. In John 3:16, we have Jesus telling Nicodemus the encapsulation of the gospel. This is the summary of what Jesus was teaching his disciples about what was about to happen. You see, Jesus here lays it out. The Son of Man, that's Jesus' favorite, especially in Mark, description of himself. That meant something to the Jewish audience that was there. That meant to them the Messiah. That was a term for them. It was one of those code terms. You know, one of those things that doesn't really make a lot of sense when you translate it, but it made a lot of sense in that day. Well, same thing here. The Son of Man, Jesus, the Messiah, Christ, is to be... How does your verse translate that? Huh? Betrayed. Okay, a couple of you have betrayed. How else? Delivered. Okay, some of you have delivered. Anybody else? Okay. Both of those are pretty good translations. We say, well, but those don't mean the same thing. Well, but this word does. It has that idea of handing over to, betraying, of The concept of in the middle of a siege, leaving the door open. That kind of a concept. Or walking somebody into the enemy camp and having them captured very deliberately. That's the idea. The Son of Man is to be delivered or betrayed into the hands of men. Jesus said a lot in that little phrase, doesn't he? That little clause tells us that Jesus, the perfect Messiah, the perfect sacrifice, is to be betrayed, handed over to the sons of men. Now let me challenge you for a minute. Was Christ a powerless victim in the middle of that? No. As the old song says, He could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set Him free. Christ was betrayed. Christ was handed over. Christ was put through horrible things. Don't let anybody kid you on that. But the miracle of the gospel, He did it voluntarily. He chose to go to the cross for us. The Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill Him. Talk about a gift for understanding. Did they just kill Him? No. They tortured Him. They beat Him within an inch of His life. Professionals whipped Him in such a way that the skin on His back hung down like rags, torn. And they crucified Him. The worst form of capital punishment ever designed by man. Crucifixion is the process by which they use a piece of mechanical equipment, a cross, to suffocate somebody in the middle of, while hanging out in the middle of the air. Literally, it compresses the chest in such a way that people literally suffocate. Death by crucifixion is a slow suffocation in the middle of lots of breathing air. The Son of Man is to be delivered in the hands of men, and they will crucify Him. And when He's been killed, He's going to rise 3 days later. Again, gift of understatement. He didn't just rise. He defeated death and the grave, and He made a way for us to live eternally with God our Father. He went through that experience to redeem us from our sins because of the fact that we needed that. And He'll rise 3 days later. That's the miracle of the gospel. How many of you have heard anything so far that you didn't know? I'll be honest, that's something we all know, right? But it's the essential of the gospel. Jesus was teaching these disciples the gospel for 3 years. He walked with them and talked with them, and He taught them what was about to happen. Sometimes we judge them harshly later on when they're surprised that what He's been teaching happened. Tradition tells us that Mark wrote down everything Peter told him, but not necessarily in order. That this is in fact the story according to Peter by tradition. I have no evidence for or against that. It certainly sounds like it's possible. But you know what's amazing is if we think of this as Peter's recollection. Years after Christ's teaching. He remembers Christ teaching the things that they need to know to become a Christian. The Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill Him, and when He's been killed, He will rise 3 days later. I told you that this is the most documented fact in human history, and I mean that. This is the most documented fact in human history. There is more documentation of this particular event, Christ being betrayed, crucified, and rising again, than any other fact in antiquity. And he spent 3 years teaching his disciples about that. Because they needed to know the facts. There are 3 things that need to happen for you to become a Christian. Number 1, you need to admit to God you're a sinner. Guess what? That's easy. You know why that's easy? Because every single one of us in here are. How many of you are sinners? How many of you just lied? Your hand's not up, then you know what? You're lying. Because every single one of us has done something in our lives that are wrong that deserves us to go to hell. Jesus died for us to make a way. That's the second thing you need to do, is believe that Christ died for our sins and was raised again on the 3rd day. Amen. Because without that, we're still stuck in our sin, and there's nothing that can save us from eternity in hell, because that's what we've earned, and that's what we deserve. There's a third thing we have to do. We have to believe that Christ, we have to admit to God we're a sinner. We have to believe that Christ died for our sins. We have to confess our faith in Jesus Christ. We have to place our faith into Christ. It's easy to do the first 2. They're simple facts. Acknowledgement of fact. The third's a little more difficult. We have to trust God for that answer. As a 6-year-old sitting on a hardwood gym floor, I understood 3 things. I was a sinner, couldn't save myself. Christ offered salvation for me. All I had to do was accept it. I did not understand as a 6-year-old why anybody would choose not to accept that. There's a part of me still doesn't. So I'm going to tell you. This next verse answers some of that question for me. Verse 32 says, but they did not understand this statement. Now, there's some interesting words here. That word understand is a word perhaps you know. How many of you have heard the word agnostic? How many of you know what it means? Literally, it's a word, it's a Greek word. It comes from a Greek word. It's translated in English, but transliterated in English, but it's a Greek word that means don't know. Those who don't know. Literally, they heard that and they didn't know what to think about it. They didn't know what it meant. They were struggling with what was the meaning there. They did not understand. They did not know what to make of it. They were agnostic. They didn't understand that statement. They didn't understand this teaching. Literally, the word there is one of the words for word. There's 3 or 4 different words in Greek for word. It's literally a statement or a word. They didn't understand the word that he was teaching. What do you mean? Now, how would you know that? Jesus, come on. Really? You're going to be turned over and killed and you're going to rise? Okay, Lord, that's not the way it works. Let me explain to you how it works. You see, if you're dead, you're dead. And that's all there is to it. Maybe we'll remember you. Maybe people will talk about you. But if you're dead, you're dead. That's not how it works. That's how we think it works. From our perspective, it is. They didn't understand. They didn't know. But I want to look at this last clause of this verse 2. I'll be honest, this was an epiphany for me. How many of you know what the word epiphany means? And no, I don't mean the time right before, I don't mean the time of the feast right around Christmas. How many of you know what it means? I had an epiphany. A light bulb came on. You know that phrase? Same idea. I had this experience of actually learning something. You see, when we talk about learning, those of us with education, who spent some time studying education, talk about 3 domains of learning. The cognitive, the affective, and the motor. Kinesthetic. Cognitive means, when we learn something cognitively, it means we we learn the thoughts of the ideas about it. For instance, if I were to ask you the question, in what year did Columbus discover America? How many of you can answer that question? Give me an answer.
1492.
1492. How do you feel about that? You don't feel much about it, do you? It's a cognitive answer. It's a fact. It's a thought. If I were to say to you, a phrase that would engender a lot of emotion. For instance, if I were to say to an LSU student, go Tigers, or to a Marine, Semper Fi. How do they feel about that? Very strong. That's affective domain. That's those emotional, that beliefs, that feelings, that who we are. How many of you like spiders? How many of you just get a warm feeling in your stomach when you think about spiders? You like them?
No.
How many of you like snakes?
Oh, I like
Okay, come on, kids, put your hands down. How many of you like roller coasters?
I love roller coasters.
Scary movies. What does all that have in common?
It's scary. It's exciting.
Fears. Yeah. Those are firmly in the affective domain. I mentioned there were 3 domains. I'm going to tell you the other one just for ease of reference. I'm going to illustrate that. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I was studying these, when I was in my master's work, one of the things my professor did was he used an illustration. He said that you can't teach somebody to juggle unless you've juggled. That's one of those things. You got to be able to do the physical skill in order to teach the physical skill. What he didn't know was there were 2 of us who were master clowns in the audience. In the classroom. And both of us raised our hands simultaneously. She happened to be sitting right in front of me at the time. And both of us read, excuse me, that's not correct. What do you mean? No, you have to be able to juggle in order to teach juggling. No. It's a skill you can teach without having done it. I can't juggle. I can't catch. If you've ever thrown something at me, you know I can't catch. But that's the 3rd domain. I was looking in the wrong domain to answer my question that I didn't understand about why somebody would turn down Christ. You see, it's not in the cognitive domain, which is where I tend to stay. I'll be honest. Unless you talk about certain things, I pretty much stay up there in the cognitive domain. That's me. Those of you who know me well, y'all know that's kind of me. Now, you get me talking about catfish and hush puppies, I slip into that affective domain. Not only that, but my accent gets a lot deeper. You get me talking about snakes and spiders, and God forbid, roller coasters. See, I don't have a fear of heights, I have a fear of falling from heights. When we talk about those, I slip into that affective domain. Literally, what this word says. It's a great, I love the way this is put. And they were afraid to ask him. They didn't understand and they were afraid. Now, the word there is phobos. How do you know what phobos means? Anybody other than the Eastland family know what phobos means?
Phobia.
That's what the preacher's kids know.
All right.
Phobia.
Those of you who don't know, my kids have been studying Greek in school this year. So that's why Jennifer knows. What does phobos mean? Fear. Y'all know that word, though. If I were afraid of spiders, I would be said to have an
Arachnophobia.
arachnophobia. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Arachnophobia. That arachnid, spiders. Phobia. Fear. An irrational, bone-chilling fear is what that means. You know what? They were afraid to ask. The word here is literally phobos. The word here is literally that same word that phobia means. That experience. I hate roller coasters. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. Did I mention I hate them? Tower of Terror. The only thing I hate more than roller coasters. It is not. I have an irrational fear of falling from heights. Okay, I have a very rational fear of falling from heights, which sometimes manifests itself irrationally. I'm going to tell you that I can't even watch a video of a roller coaster. It's scary to me. I'm afraid of that. I know I'm safe in the roller coaster. Well, more or less. Ask me sometime, I'll tell you that story. But I know I'm safe in it. But you know what? I'm still afraid. Because I'm still falling. They didn't understand what Christ was teaching. And they were afraid to ask. I was looking the wrong domain. I was looking for a cognitive answer for the reason why somebody would choose, understanding if they had a problem with sin, that Christ offered an answer, and all they had to do was accept His answer. Why on earth, rationally speaking, they would choose not to do that? And I didn't realize it wasn't a rational question. That was an epiphany for me this week. I'll be honest. That it wasn't a cognitive question. It was an effective question. It's a matter of fear for the disciples. Now, most of you have gotten a chance to get to know the Apostle Peter through scriptures and through the stories of him. Do you see him being one who's easily afraid? Is he one of those guys who's timid, shy, a little mean? One of those guys that you doesn't want to take a chance? That's him, right? No, he's bold and brash and quite frankly outgoing, life of the party kind of guy. They came to arrest Jesus. He took out a sword and whacks off the ear of one of the guys. Guess what? He needed to practice with a sword because he wasn't aiming at the ear. That was Peter. You know what he says the problem with the disciples before the death of Christ was? They were afraid to ask. That's what he says. If we believe that Mark wrote down what Peter told him, but not necessarily in order, which is what the tradition tells us, then Mark says here that they were afraid asking. Who was afraid? Peter. I want to ask you a question today. What are you afraid of? What's holding you back in your spiritual walk? What's holding you back in your relationship with Christ? What are you afraid of? I'm going to tell you, we can teach those cognitive answers. I enjoy doing it. I love doing it. We can teach that. I can even teach you the physical skills of Bible study and prayer and the physical, the spiritual disciplines. I can teach those skills. We can do that. But that effective domain, when it comes to spirituality, is something you got to walk by. You got to figure out. What you're afraid of? What's holding you back? What's preventing you from asking the question? What's preventing you from getting the answer? What's preventing you from knowing the fullness of Christ and all of His riches? They didn't understand. They were agnostic. And they were too afraid to ask. I'm going to tell you, I had a doctor said something to me Monday that I didn't understand. It sounded like it was anything other than a proper noun. I would have stopped him and said, I don't understand what you're saying. Say it some other way for me. By the way, when you visit a doctor, if he's talked over you, ask him to say it a different way. If you can't, then get the doctor. But I'm going to tell you that goes for spirituality too. They were afraid to ask him. He wants to teach you everything you need to know. He wants to make sure that you understand what's going to happen spiritually. He wants to make sure you understand how important it is to make a decision for Him. He wants to make sure you know who He is and what He's doing. He's written us this love letter called the Bible. What you afraid of? One of my favorite Christian artists is a guy named Toby Mac. And one of my favorites of his songs is a piece called Jesus Freak. And my favorite line from that favorite song, from that favorite Christian artist is, I don't really care if they label me a Jesus freak. I don't even care if they find out it's true. What are you afraid of? What's holding you back in your spirituality? What's holding you back in your walk with Christ? What fear is it that's holding you from being the Christian that you know that Christ wants you to be? What fear is it that's holding you back from going where Christ is calling? What fear is it that's holding you back from making a decision for Him? What fear is it that's holding you back from sharing His glorious gospel with those who need to hear it? Or else they're going to die and spend eternity in hell. What are you afraid of? We're going to sing a hymn of invitation here in a few moments. Our hymn of invitation this morning is Just As I Am. I'm going to tell you that God accepts your warts, fears, challenges, and all. I want you to come on this first verse if you have a decision to make. If you need to leave some fear behind, if you need to ask the questions, if you need to understand better, I want you to come as we sing.